Well, welcome back to class. This is chapter 7 in the student work text, and I am sure that you guys are anxious to hear some of this and be able to get some more information regarding chapter 7 and stuff that'll help with your project as you're completing this next deadline. And that's what we're going to cover here. Chapter 7 deals with really that outline. Now, chapter 7 really asks the question, how do I organize and prepare an event? Well, what I'm going to take you through with this particular session through chapter 7 is I'm going to walk you through the outline that's on the last page of your syllabus. That outline is the template for doing numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, and 9. So through every program for the rest of this project, every component you're gonna go through this outline that's listed there in the bottom at the end of your syllabus. So I want to walk you through that. There are so many components when it comes to the program. If you don't have a detailed game plan, it really you run the risk of leaving out a lot of critical and crucial information, as well as overlooking some things that would have made it more purposeful. And we know that from our axioms in youth ministry in the first chapter that purposeful programs are powerful programs. And so we're going to walk through this outline. In this chapter, we're going to look at what needs to be planned in most events, most programs that we use in student ministry, and for those of you doing children's ministry as well. And it's also the list that you use for marathons and series. So when you do all of those, the remaining parts of your project, you're going to use this outline. I want you to notice, too, that the first few components ask for, and several of the components ask for detailed rationale. In other words, asking the question, why? So not just giving me a short answer, but I want you to explain why. It's not enough just to pick a date or a purpose, but you need to think through how it fits with your calendar. Give me the reasons why you would put it in that time of year. And if you need to think hypothetically when it comes to the calendar as you're planning this in advance, you need to think through what you've experienced in local church and give me some reasons why you would select certain dates, times, audience aims, and those kinds of things. And just give me a real thoughtful reason for your choices. So let's move forward. All right. So in our outline, we start with something that's very simple, and really you don't need a rationale for this. You just give me the name of the program, okay? And it may be, Water Wars on for the summertime program. It could be a camp event. It could be a retreat. But you need to give me the name of the program. Now, for number 4, we're going to look at type of program, and when we say type of program, it's going to be an event. Now, you also have an event listed, I believe, for number 5, but then number 6 is a different approach, and as well as 7, 8, and 9. They're not necessarily events. There's some marathon, and then there's some series. So you need to tell me. Now, obviously, for number 4, it is an event. But that's what I'm looking for under the type section, and it really doesn't require much rationale. But then when we get to purpose, it's even more critical. We're going to choose levels 1 through 4 and give me a rationale for why this particular program is designated as a primary level 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, just to refresh your memory, go to the bottom of page, I think it's page 9 in your work text, and you need to look through. There's a grid there, and we usually lay that in a pyramid form. And the bottom of that grid begins with relationship building. It's pre-evangelistic. And then with the second level deals with outreach or evangelism. And then the third level is growth or discipleship. The fourth level is ministry or service. And then there's also a level 5 that's leadership reproduction. We're not going to program for leadership reproduction. It's more of a product where students who are spiritually maturing get involved with the mission of the student ministry, which should be the Great Commission from Matthew 28, 19, and 20. So you're going to find a level that it fits with. I've already designated that for you in your outline. Number 4 is a level 1 activity or an event. And so it's going to focus on relationship building. It doesn't mean that you're going to exclude the gospel. It means the litmus or the criteria for an effective event or activity at level 1 is not necessarily that the gospel is given, but it is that we lay a foundation through relationships that give us an opportunity to show them how much we care and earn the opportunity to be able to share life on life and through a relationship, share the power of the gospel. So you're going to give me your purpose. The next one is intensity. And when we deal with intensity, a program can be major or minor in energy, and several factors play into that. You can see them on your screen there as well as in your work text. Cost, group size, the amount of promotion, if you're doing radio promo or if you're doing a massive mail out, as opposed to emails. One is major, one is minor. Distance traveled with the event. That's another thing that comes into play when we think about major and minor energy, as well as time involved. I mean, if you're doing something that's a week long, that's major in energy. If you're doing something that lasts a couple of hours, or if you have a series that would take up an hour or two on a Sunday afternoon or a Wednesday evening, then the time doesn't necessarily make it major in energy. So you need to consider all of these and give me your rationale. I know what you're thinking. Many of you would love for me to propose something more specific as to what defines major and minor, but I really want you to think through the details. And I want you to consider the cost, group size, promo, distance travel, and time, especially as you're imagining the ministry that you're using as an environment for doing this project, and what is appropriate. Because what's major in group size for one student ministry may not be major for another student ministry. It really depends on the context of that local church ministry. So that's what is involved with intensity. Then we move on to group dynamic, and this is so simple. If you want to skip ahead to chapter 10, you can see a little bit more information as what defines large or small group. But I want you to tell me, is this targeted towards large group or a small group dynamic? Now, if it's a small group dynamic, it doesn't necessarily mean you have few people. It means that the dynamic is small. In other words, you may bring 100 students into a ministry program, but you're going to focus on a small group dynamic where you break up into small groups, and the purpose and the goals and the aims are directed towards being accomplished in the context of a small group. Give me a rationale with that as well. We're also going to look at the next thing in your outline is audience. Who are you targeting with this particular event? You need to write this up. You can begin to see how this is very tedious, but also once this is done, it helps you really promote as well as get people on board so they can see the why, and then they'll get on board with the plan and the how. Well, when we look at audience, there's several things that I didn't necessarily put there on the screen, but you can see there in your notes. We're looking at a couple different things. One, we're looking to just to choose who is coming and how many you think are coming. Give me your rationale for that. And there's three key things you look at there. One, you're looking at gender and you're looking at age. And I would push you back to think through the general age characteristics of adolescents. The middle schoolers, a general age characteristic is they're physically developing. High school, they're really geared towards relationships even more, but they're also developing in different ways and looking towards purpose and peer pressure to shape what they say, what they believe, and how they engage in their culture. And then the late adolescent, the college or the career single, in their early to mid 20s. Some of the age characteristics are sometimes described as leisure, but also looking for places of service. And so Number two that you look at when you're determining your audience is you're looking at how many. Be very realistic, be professional in your projection, and make it based on. There's really five key things you want to look at. One, you want to look at past experience of this activity. What's the history of this type of event, if any? And then what's the history of your youth group? Do they normally participate very well, or is it normally a small group? If you normally have a small group and you're projecting a large number, it may be totally unrealistic without drastically changing the program or the activity. Thinking about promo, if you're not really hammering promo, either interpersonally in contacting students or through a real wide range of promo variety, then it may not be realistic to expect a large number. The prospect pool. Think about the event and how many students do you have access to that actually would respond to that event, and then pre-registration. It's a great way to gauge numbers as they come in. You know that you'll have this many pre-registered, and once again you can look back over the past experience or the history of that activity. Then number three, you look at big or small attendance, in that it is always relative to your group's normal membership. Okay, so you may think you want 200 students, but you have 40 that come on a regular basis. Well, 200 students may be completely unrealistic, and maybe it's what God led you to, but for this project, I want you to think about what's realistic for that youth group of 35 or 40. So what would be big for that group would definitely be 100. But if you have a student ministry of about 85 on a regular basis, and you're projecting 100, that may not be uh, the projection that you need to focus on for that large group event, if that's what you're planning. So audience aim. Then we look at date. Okay, choose a date. Choose a day. Give me a quick rationale of why it fits on the calendar then, and that's the prime choice that you should make. Then we look at time. And when we look at time, we're thinking about the beginning of your event. Okay, how long does it last, duration, and when are you going to wrap it up? And give me a rationale for how that time is going to be used, and why you set it for that time period. Then we move into location. With location, we're specifically want you to just identify where it's going to happen and describe the facilities. Give me a rationale why that's the best place for this event. Administration. When we think about administration, in every one of your last two deadlines, numbers 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, and 9, I want you to think about who is doing the bulk of the administration, whether it's being done in your student ministry office or within the local church office, or you're using an outside or a parachurch organization. Now, be very intentional in that when I say parachurch, I just don't mean like Young Life or Youth for Christ. If you if you take your students on a mission trip, but you use another organization to help pull that together and give you most of your resources, then you're using an outside parachurch organization. If you go to a camp, if you go to Student Life, if you go to Mission Fuse, if you do uh, Centrifuge, or if you go to here in the state of Kentucky, you go to Crossings camps, and there's others. You're using a parachurch organization, so that's the difference there that you need to consider. Then staffing. What are you looking at with staffing? Well, I'm going to give you several things here that I want to see from you. You're the administrator. I want you to list the names of everyone who's going to be involved. If you don't know the names, make up a name because you're going to give a job description. Then I want you to give me the ratio. We start with 1 to 10, okay, as a ratio, but we adjust it, as you can see there in your outline, we adjust it based on the age of kids that are involved in that event, based on the size and the type of the activity, and some consideration given for gender, for guys and girls, okay? So if you have a middle school activity, and that middle school activity is involving traveling somewhere where you're in an inner city environment, you're going to want a better ratio than 1 to 10. You're going to want like 1 to 4 or 1 to 3. If you have a smaller group of 12, then your ratio can actually be 3 to 12, in that, which is really a 1 to 4 ratio, because you're going to be there and you're going to have at least one male leader and one female leader. But if they're older, if they're juniors and seniors, and you have a small group of 25, you can usually do that with 3 to 4 staff, depending on what the activity is. So that's where you have to consider the type of activity. Then I want you to give a detailed job description, okay, for every single person. You can think about the various categories: promotion and registration, transportation, food and the games, speaker, music, skits. And now let me just press back into you a little bit. Ephesians 4:12 says we're to equip the body to do the work of the ministry. This is why you should not have your name listed for every one of these things. You need to enlist others to take part in this planning of this event, and equip them on how to do that. Speaking of equip, we get to the next thing in your outline, which is equipment and materials. I want you to put this list into categories that are very specific. Only be general when necessary, but for the most part, be specific. Number one is you need to list every item. It doesn't matter if it's small or if it's big. If you're talking about plastic forks or if you're talking about subwoofers, it doesn't matter. I want you to list every item. Then tell me how much of every item you're going to use and is needed for the event. Number three is look at the source. Where are you going to get it? Where's it coming from? And then number five, tell me about how you're getting it. Okay, the procurement. How's it going to be obtained? Is it something that's owned by the church or by you? Is it being borrowed? If it's owned by you, then it's being borrowed by the church. But letter B is bought. Are you buying something? Are you renting something? Or is it being donated? And then number five is I want you to look at the cost for all the equipment, for both the bought and the rented parts of the equipment. And then give me a breakdown. You can see there an example in your student work text of just a grid that kind of walks you through the different things that are needed. Super soakers, you need 25 of them. You need 274 boxes of Jello, 35 plungers, 4 light trees, 50 hay bales. So that's just some things that give you an idea of what I'm expecting with your equipment list. Okay. Then we move from equipment list to another nitty gritty, and that is finances. And I want you also to put that in a chart as well. And let's just talk through that really quick. There's really two basic categories, okay? And the basic categories are expenses versus income, okay? When you look at expenses, I want you to give me the equipment category totals, services that you're having, brought in for any particular program, and you may not have any with every particular event. Major rentals, and then honorariums. Now let me talk to you a little bit about honorariums. When you have musicians come in, a lot of times they will have already set those honorariums. When you have guest speakers come in, many times they will not. My personal practice is that I never set an honorarium. but I hope that you have a guideline. If you have someone that is relatively new, under 5 years, that maybe you went to seminary with, and they've been in ministry for 5 years, and you're going to have them come and help you with one of your events, then $75 to $100 per session is fair. If you're talking about someone who's been in it for a couple of decades, who is a veteran in ministry, or an accomplished writer and author, you need to think more in the lines of $200 to $250 per session, and in some cases even as high as $500 per session, depending on who you bring in and the scope of the event. You need to cover all their expenses. Don't make them ask for this. Cover their expenses. Be professional. Go ahead and volunteer. During my years in youth ministry, when we brought in camp speakers, I would forward them a check for travel based on how far away they were coming. And if they were driving a 7 to 8 hour drive to get there, then I would send them a forwarding check to help with travel cost. If they were flying, we would obviously purchase their plane ticket to bring them in. And you need to think about it. You're giving more for speakers with more experience. You give higher honorariums for speakers speaking to larger audiences, and and then you also need to think about if they're members of your church. If that happens to be the case, is there a policy that would prohibit you from paying them, or should you pay them? So those are your expenses. So when you think about those four categories: equipment, services, major rentals, as well as honorariums, list out those expenses. And then I want you to list out the income. And there's several different categories where you can find income. One, if you do ticket sales. If you have an event where there's a concert, you're going to do ticket sales. You may not do ticket sales for everything. In fact, I know you don't. Then for other things, you need fundraisers for mission trips and camps and things of that nature. You also get donations different times of year, that are special donations. And then you need to look to your youth budget, which is where the majority of your funding will probably come from. And then during mission trips and camps, I know it's always a good time to involve the church body at large to take a special opportunity to give an offering that will go towards the cost of those things. So you take your expenses and your income, and then you find your balance with your finances. Okay, so put it in a chart that way. What about promo? What are you going to do with promo? Well, with promo, you're looking specifically at detailing two different areas. Okay, I want you to give me the entire promotion schedule. Okay, now that means from the first mention of an event to the last push, and it would at minimum start several weeks before major events and marathons, to as much as 6 months before then. Number two is I want you to give me a detailed account of all your methods. Now, I've given you a grocery list of about 13 different methods there: videos and school newspapers, phone blitzes, emails. I would add social media, youth group websites, t-shirts, free tickets, billboards, radio, newspapers, and it could be school newspapers, as mentioned earlier. If you're doing a major citywide event, you may use bus panels, maybe movie theater, film trailers, flyers, and posters. Now, let me say something about flyers and posters. For all practical purposes, and in most cases, you don't do a freehand lettering or drawing. You need to make it sure it's exciting and has visual content. You may use a creative or unusual format. Keep it clutter-free. Just keep it simple, just the facts. Be honest. Don't be misleading. Don't try to say, hey, we're giving you beer, and put the word root above the word beer in really small print. Be honest, not misleading. And then give the vital information. Make sure you have these 7 things in there somewhere. Okay? They need to know who is supposed to come, what age, what gender. Give the name of the program. Give a brief program descriptor, a couple of words, or maybe a tagline. Who is the sponsor? Probably the church. Where is it going to happen? Give me the location, date and time, be specific, and then the cost, if any. So that's what happens with promo. Then we look at timeline. You say timeline, what is that? Well, it's very simple, not very complicated. Is timeline first involves a scheduled outline of the actual event and what's going to happen. So start from the time that students arrive. Your event starts when the first student arrives. It ends when the last student leaves. But give me a timeline. Walk me through in 15-minute increments, if necessary, that timeline, and set up through cleanup. And then always have a plan B in case of trouble, in case of rain or other situations. Then we get down to the end of this particular section, and I'm not going to spend an inordinate amount of time on this. It's in your student work text, but when we come down to the narrative, really what I'm looking for with the narrative is a verbal storyboard, an in-depth description of that whole program. So close your eyes, dream about the program, then describe it as if it has already happened. Okay? Describe the environment, describe the games. And when you give the narrative, you're going to describe the games, but you're also going to include things like What's the purpose of that game? And I'll give you some suggestions there. 5. Some are just for fun. Some are to help be icebreakers. Some are to help create teamwork. Some are to help drive it towards a focus. And then others are really just to do things that can encourage other people. You need to be aware of competition with games, okay? And those who don't necessarily have athletic ability. So compensate for that. You need to obtain some versatile props that can be used in different ways, and I've given a list of those there. Letter D is you need to use idea books. I mean the greatest games out there probably have already been used, and you need to resource those. Letter E is vary the simple games like volleyball. Do some crazy things with volleyball or games like that. And then think about some extreme games from time to time. Throughout the years, Willow Creek kind of pioneered the days of extreme games. Hume Lake Camp in California was fantastic at that. And, I give some suggestions there on really pumping it up and make it something that's a little more out of the ordinary. Think about your food. Tell me what kind of food you're going to have. Describe this thing. Once again, this is not meant to be an itemization as much as it is a storyline description as you walk through this narrative. And then the last thing I believe that should be in your outline is I want you to give me an evaluation tool. Now, some of you have already asked this question on Ask the Professor. You asked if, how do you evaluate something that hasn't happened? I'm not necessarily looking for you to do the evaluation. I want you to tell me the plan, when you will do it after the event, and then give me the actual empty tool, the blank tool that should have questions and places to write stuff in so your leaders or your key students can give some feedback and some input. So that's how it works. That's chapter 7 in your student work text. Once again, this outline is the template you're going to use for numbers 4, 5, 6, which is coming up next Monday, and then 7, 8, and 9, which comes due in November. So I hope this helps, and I hope you still have some questions. Please put them on the Ask the Professor link, and either Caleb or I will try to answer those as quickly as possible. And have a good week.